bap, ancient mixed grains. Long before refined white rice became a symbol of modern Asian cuisine, the ancient Korean diet ran on a rough, highly resilient mixture of grains called bap. In the early kingdoms of Goguryeo and Silla, pure white rice was a luxury reserved strictly for royalty and the aristocracy. The common soldiers and peasant farmers survived on a dense, heavy blend of barley, millet, sorghum, and whatever wild beans they could forage. Cooked in heavy iron cauldrons called gamasot, this thick grain bowl was filling, cheap, and provided the slow-burning energy needed to work the mountainous terrain. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the absolute baseline of survival. However, a bowl of plain grains was practically inedible on its own during a freezing 6-month-long Korean winter. To get those grains down, ancient people needed a side dish that could survive the frost without rotting, leading to the creation of the most famous food on the peninsula, kimchi, ancient white kimchi. If you imagine ancient kimchi as the fiery red spicy cabbage we know today, you are off by 1,000 years. Red chili peppers didn't arrive in Korea until the 1600s. The original ancient kimchi, known as chimchai, meaning steeped vegetables, was a purely white, intensely salty, and often sour dish. Because the mountainous Korean winters killed off all agriculture, survival meant packing daikon radishes, cucumbers, and wild greens into massive earthenware jars called ongi. These jars were buried deep in the frozen ground to regulate the temperature, allowing the vegetables to ferment slowly in saltwater brine, garlic, and ginger without freezing solid. This lactic acid fermentation didn't just preserve the food, it created a sharp, fizzy probiotic powerhouse that kept the population alive and free of scurvy until spring. Vegetables kept the peasants alive, but when the Joseon kings needed to feed an entire crowd after a royal religious sacrifice, they turned to a massive, boiling cauldron of bones. Seolleongtang, ox bone soup. Seolleongtang is a dish born directly from royal decree and ancient agricultural rites. During the Joseon dynasty, the king would perform annual springtime sacrifices at the Seolleongtang altar, praying to the gods for a bountiful harvest. As part of the ritual, an ox was sacrificed, but instead of the royal court hoarding the meat, the king ordered that a massive soup be made to feed the hundreds of peasant farmers and labourers who attended the ceremony. To stretch a single ox to feed a massive crowd, royal cooks boiled the bones, hooves, and tough cuts of meat for over a dozen hours. The marrow slowly melted into the water, turning the broth a rich, cloudy, milky white. It was a hearty, nutrient-dense soup that instantly warmed the bones of exhausted farmers. If a milky bone broth fed the working class, it takes a massive leap in extravagance to understand what was happening inside the walls of the royal palace. If exploring the origins of 1,000-year-old survival foods and royal rituals is pulling you in, do me a favour, hit like and subscribe, because we are about to step inside the king's palace to look at the heavy hitters. Sinseollo, royal hot pot. Inside the royal court, food wasn't just sustenance, it was a visual display of imperial power. The absolute peak of this flex was Sinseollo, a dazzling, elaborate hot pot served exclusively to the king. The dish was cooked directly on the royal table inside a specially designed silver vessel with a hollow centre tube holding glowing charcoal. Surrounding this fiery core was a meticulously arranged, colourful mosaic of up to 25 luxurious ingredients: pheasant meat, abalone, pine nuts, perfectly sliced beef, fish dumplings, and rare mushrooms, all simmering in a rich, clear beef broth. Eating Sinseollo was a deeply philosophical experience, designed to represent the harmony of the 5 elements through its colours and textures. It was the height of refined, delicate culinary art. But far away from the polished silver of the royal court, fishermen in the deep south were eating a dish so notoriously pungent it would make the king's chefs gag. Hongeo, fermented skate, coming back to our terrifying teas from the beginning. Centuries ago, before the invention of refrigeration, transporting fresh fish from the southern coastal islands to the mainland was a race against rot. Most fish spoiled quickly, but fishermen realised that the skate, a cartilage-heavy fish related to the stingray, didn't rot like normal fish. Instead of urinating, skates excrete uric acid through their skin. When left in a dark, warm jar for weeks, that uric acid ferments into pure ammonia, acting as a natural preservative that kills off deadly bacteria. The resulting meat is chewy, tough, and smells exactly like highly concentrated window cleaner. Ancient scholars and commoners alike grew to love the searing, sinus-clearing chemical burn of chewing the ammonia-soaked flesh, claiming it aided digestion and cleared the mind. Chewing on fermented stingray required a seriously strong drink to wash it down, which is exactly why ancient Koreans perfected a cloudy, fast-acting brew of their own. Makgeolli Nuruk, ancient rice wine. To wash down the heavy grains and pungent fermented dishes, the ancient Korean working class relied on makgeolli, the oldest alcoholic beverage on the peninsula. Unlike the clear, highly refined rice wines reserved for the aristocracy, makgeolli was the drink of the farmers. It was brewed quickly by mixing steamed rice with nuruk, a wild, raw fermentation starter made of crushed wheat and ambient mold, and water. Within just a few days, the mixture transformed into a milky, sweet, slightly fizzy, and pleasantly sour alcohol. Because it wasn't filtered, it was incredibly thick and packed with complex carbohydrates and active yeast. It functioned as both a cheap drink and a liquid meal, giving exhausted farmers a massive influx of calories and a mild buzz to get them through back-breaking days in the rice paddies. But they didn't just drink raw living yeast. They also had a taste for completely raw unfermented meat. Yukhoe, ancient beef tartare. Long before modern refrigeration, ancient Koreans developed a taste for yukhoe, a beautifully simple and dangerous dish of raw seasoned beef. Historical texts from the Joseon era reveal that eating raw meat was a prized delicacy, heavily influenced by Mongolian culinary traditions that seeped into the peninsula centuries earlier. Because killing draft cattle was strictly regulated and often illegal to protect the agricultural workforce, beef was incredibly rare. When a cow was legally slaughtered, the absolute freshest, most tender cuts were immediately separated. Instead of cooking it, chefs julienned the raw meat and massaged it with a delicate blend of ancient soy sauce, sesame oil, garlic, and a touch of honey, often serving it with crisp Asian pear to cut the richness. This raw delicacy was a rare, expensive treat, but it relied entirely on a dark, salty liquid that served as the true backbone of all ancient Korean cooking. Jang, the master ferment. The true secret to ancient Korean culinary survival wasn't a single dish, but a dark, bubbling, funky, baseline ingredient known as jang. Thousands of years ago, Koreans mastered the art of fermenting soybeans into heavy blocks called maiju. These blocks were hung from the rafters to collect wild mold, then soaked in massive earthenware jars filled with salt water and charcoal. After months of waiting, this slow process yielded two distinct miracles: ganjang, a deeply savoury, pitch-black ancient soy sauce, and doenjang, a thick, pungent, earthy soybean paste. These fermented bases were the absolute soul of the ancient Korean diet, providing the essential umami, salt, and protein needed to flavour everything from wild mountain herbs to royal beef broths. They were the invisible engines that powered an entire civilization. If you made it all the way to the Master Ferments, hit subscribe and share this with the history buff in your life.